generative AI with teaching and learning. So obviously, we know that generative AI is rapidly transforming how students learn, how they engage with content, how they communicate and create, making digital literacy and critical thinking both really essential skills for the modern classroom. So as faculty, we really face the challenge of helping our students not only use these tools effectively, but how to use them and approach them with a critical eye, right? How to evaluate their outputs with discernment and with integrity. Um, so in this workshop, we are going to explore that relationship between our students, generative AI, and critical thinking, along with some strategies for integrating AI into assignments or activities in ways that can promote analysis, reflection, and responsible use rather than passive dependence, which is what I think we're all really afraid of, which is a fair concern. So together, we're going to examine some practical approaches to fostering AI literacy while hopefully preserving the core values of academic rigor and intellectual curiosity. So our goals for today's workshop are these: to review research investigating generative AI and its impact in general on learning and critical thinking. And then we will explore strategies for cultivating critical thinking, inquiry, and reflection in our students around and with AI, but then also some strategies for using AI to improve or enhance critical thinking. So a few different goals for today. But before we really dive in, I always like to kind of take the pulse of the room. Um, so let's think a little bit about what we already know or think we know about our students' relationships with generative AI. So my question for you is this: what do you think students don't know or need to know about generative AI, just based on your own experience or maybe assumptions? And you can put your answers in the chat. But if you want to unmute and share out that way, that's good too. So what do you think students don't know or need to know about generative AI? Waiting you out, y'all. Great. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, it can be a helpful tool. We don't need to be scared that it is automatically cheating. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Miwako, yeah, first and foremost, AI is not perfect. They definitely need to know that, right? They shouldn't believe all it says. Yeah, thanks, Deepak. They need to know how to validate results from AI. Absolutely. Thank you, Marcus. For sure. Anything else before we keep going? Anything else that you feel like students really need to know? Yeah, wording questions properly, effectively, right? How to do some prompt engineering. Uh, yeah, thanks, Taib. It's trained based on how we interact with it, so we can't believe everything, right? It's kind of like maybe believing everything in a Wikipedia article. You know, we know it's crowdsourced. Um, yeah, good prompts, that it makes mistakes, and yeah, the environmental impact is something that's really rising to the surface right now. And I actually did get to have a conversation with some students last week, and they did bring up the environmental impact. So that's definitely something I think we all need to consider, right? So thank you for those thoughts. So obviously, our students' relationship and our own relationship with generative AI is very complicated. There are many shades of gray that color it, including how it might impact critical thinking, right? It has good points and bad points in so many different ways. So at this point, many might ask, if AI is so problematic, Why do we want to use it to teach in the classroom? Why are we engaging with it at all with our students? And the answer to that is this. AI literacy is in increasingly high demand in the workforce and beyond. Employers are definitely seeking professionals who can leverage AI tools and strategies, making AI really a important 21st century skill. And here are just a few statistics that bear that out. So, one study tells us that 86% of business leaders are calling for more training in responsible AI use. In 2024, 628,000 job postings demanded at least one AI skill. And this image I have over here is just a quick snapshot that I took from LinkedIn from job postings that were related to AI or requiring AI skills. And this is a very small snapshot of those. And then we have another study telling us that reskilling and upskilling the existing workforce to better work alongside AI or with AI is anticipated to be the most common workforce strategy to come. So 77% of surveyed employers plan to implement this strategy by 2030. Over 90% of respondents in the top 10 industries expect AI skills to increase in use. And 69% of surveyed employers globally plan to implement the strategy around AI. So maybe as much as we would like to ignore it, I think it's pretty obvious that we can't, especially if one of our jobs is to help our students succeed, not only in our classroom, but beyond our classroom. So it really does behoove us to kind of learn how to play nicely with it, right? And help our students. So first, what does the research tell us so far about AI's impact on critical thinking? So we're going to start here, obviously, with some of the maybe less exciting news. So what kind of risks does AI pose to critical thinking skills? Here's what research is starting to tell us. And bear in mind, this is still a very young field, right? There's a lot of research out there growing, but it's still very young. So here's what we know. The unguided use of generative AI presents some risks that can undermine critical thinking. So first we have what's called algorithm. And that's a term that refers to passing off content generated by algorithms or generative AI as one's own original work without acknowledgement. So basically, it's plagiarism using AI as opposed to plagiarizing off somebody else's work, right? So when students use AI to produce complete answers without evaluating or revising them, they're obviously bypassing that kind of analytical process that builds those critical thinking skills. This practice encourages kind of that passive consumption, right, of AI outputs rather than the active questioning, the verification, the synthesis of ideas, all those things we really want them to engage with. And next, we have over-reliance and cognitive offloading. So I know another concern for a lot of us is that students may develop kind of an excessive dependence on generative AI. I mean, not just our students, but we could do that too, right? And again, that could lead to cognitive passivity, intellectual laziness, and just generally skipping that really important intellectual effort that's traditionally associated with the learning process. And that offloading, right, that cognitive offloading, because of the over-reliance, could lead to skill atrophy if our students are bypassing those opportunities for kind of independent thinking and practice in kind of the art of complex reasoning, right? One study in particular identified a significant negative correlation between frequent use of AI tools and critical thinking performance, specifically showing that over-reliance on these automated outputs reduce students' cognitive effort and can lead to poorer performance. I think that makes a lot of sense. So this habitual dependence can can atrophy those skills and make all of us, including our students, a little bit lazy, when it comes to cognition. Um, Something else to consider is automation bias and blind trust. So we know that these generative AI outputs can be really impressive sometimes, or appear to be really impressive, right? They can appear coherent and authoritative, and that can lead users to uncritically trust their results. Like, oh, this sounds great, it's got to be right. And that can then lead them to ignore that need for verification. And some quantitative analysis has shown that higher confidence, so right, this blind trust piece in generative AI doing a task is associated with less critical thinking engagement. Again, makes sense. So I have a question mark next to this last piece because we're going to address this a little bit later. So generative AI usage has been found to show some improvements, mainly in some lower levels of cognitive processing. So like those lower levels on Bloom's taxonomy, like remembering, understanding, and that could suggest a potential risk of shifting a focus towards those lower levels of things like mere recall, rather than the higher order processes like evaluation, creation, analysis. So the question mark is there because what we do as instructors can help mitigate that. And that's really what we're going to talk about here. So this isn't great. Like, this isn't great news, right? But I want to highlight something here for you. The key word here is unguided use. So if our students don't have any guidance when they're using AI, these are the things that can happen. So as instructors, we are here to provide that guidance for them, to help them learn how to do all of these important things around AI. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, we've talked about some bad news. Let's talk about some good news. So believe it or not, research is also showing that interacting with generative AI in meaningful ways can actually help cultivate good critical thinking skills. Gen AI can offer some significant potential to support and cultivate critical thinking skills and disposition when integrated through structured, intentional strategies, right? Intentional pedagogical or andragogical strategies. So the mechanisms by which generative AI can support or cultivate critical thinking spans cognitive, metacognitive, and behavioral dimensions. And those things can help us facilitate inquiry in our students. And back to that idea of cognitive offloading, that can be a good thing too, because it frees up some of our cognitive resources that can then be devoted to higher order skills and more difficult tasks, right? So here are some of the ways that when used thoughtfully and meaningfully, generative AI can actually support critical thinking. So first of all, the use of Gen AI can actually help us assist in shifting the educational focus from teaching students just the what, right? That factual knowledge, to encouraging them to further explore the why and the how of those concepts that we want them to learn. And that can foster a deeper understanding and help advance some cognitive processing, right? So because they're going to have to engage in some analysis of what generative AI is producing, that's how we can help get them to those higher order skills. Facilitating inquiry is another piece. Oh, Emmy, I see your comment in the chat. In fact, you will get a handout later on in the session that has about 3 pages worth of references for you. So you will see what supports this. In terms of facilitating inquiry, generative AI can be used to encourage exploration and inquiry by prompting students to ask challenging questions. It can facilitate analysis, and by encouraging our students to critically engage with the material, right? One study actually found significant improvements in applying, analyzing, and evaluating skills following an intervention with structured generative AI use. So it is possible. Fostering metacognition is another really interesting benefit, I think. When we have our students interact with generative AI in a structured, meaningful way, especially when doing things like analyzing outputs or engaging with alternative perspectives, again, that can help students reflect on their own cognitive processes and assumptions, right? So it can help foster some of that self-awareness in our students and help them refine their reasoning and judgment over time. And again, studies also show that interacting with generative AI can enhance reflective performance and encourage reflection and reflective activities in general, which the research tells us is really important for improving learning, right? Metacognition and reflection are really beneficial. And then here's what I already mentioned before. It can reduce extraneous cognitive load for our students. So when used intentionally and thoughtfully, again, those are the key words here, right? The offloading that is enabled by generative AI can act as a cognitive amplifier, improving efficiency and freeing mental resources for some of that higher order intellectual work. So, I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Think about the energy that we expend on a daily basis just composing emails, right? And if we can offload a little bit of that to generative AI, again, with some critical use, that can free up some of our time and resources as well. So for some of those more meaningful teaching tasks, right? Like spending more time on feedback or building relationships with our students. So it can work in the same way with our students. We just have to be very thoughtful and purposeful in how we help them get to that point, right? So now we know there are, in fact, both positive and negative components in that very complicated relationship between Gen AI and critical thinking. And we also know now that AI literacy and effective use are increasingly desired and necessary skills for all of us. So that means, again, we kind of need to make friends with this technology and perhaps reframe some of the skills our students are learning. So cognitive shift mapping is a framework for understanding how generative AI changes the mental processes that we engage in or that our students are using to complete academic tasks. So instead of assuming traditional steps like brainstorming or writing a draft, those remain the same. This approach, this cognitive shift mapping approach, can help us identify where AI accelerates, replaces, or disrupts some of those steps, and where there are new skills, such as evaluation and synthesis, that need to be emphasized. So this table offers just a few examples of what some cognitive shifts around some very traditional academic skills and roles might look like when generative AI is integrated in some way. So for instance, if the task is writing, what originally starts as the author, they might become an editor or a curator instead. When doing research, instead of focusing on that finding task, right, just finding the resources to begin with, it might shift into becoming an evaluator or a synthesizer or more focus on these skills than maybe before. So in light of this, within your discipline, what's one task students used to do manually that AI now assists with? And then what new cognitive demand does this place on them? So think about that for a minute. And then if you have some ideas, I'd love for you to share them in the chat. So what are some original, like traditional tasks or roles that students used to engage in or still do, but that might be shifted by AI in your own discipline? What ideas do you have about that? Yeah, research, absolutely.
So, are we allowed to talk?
Of course.
So I'm in science, and it's uh it's like the AI doesn't do you any good if you don't already know the answer, right? So
Hmm.
if you
Hmm.
don't know if it's wrong,
Hmm.
then it doesn't really do you a lot of good. So you still have to know the information,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Which is good, right? That's what we
Yeah,
want.
that's what we
Uh,
want. And we need to make sure our students know that too, so we can disrupt that kind of blind trust process that we talked about earlier. So, research, reading and synthesizing sources, absolutely. Exploring patterns and data sets, yes. Online discussion forum, yeah, the type of assessment is outdated. People still use it. There are still things that students are engaging in.
For the thing that Jessica mentioned, I would say also when we do the research, like prompting it to give you the references, but then even then we found that they make up references too. So you got to be
Yep,
careful. Like
yep,
something that I try to make sure the students know they need to
yeah.
find the references and make sure they're actually real.
Yeah, that's so important.
yeah, like go
And
back and
I
double check it.
double check, triple check. I mean, and you all probably know of a few very public, embarrassing moments when well-known people may have presented studies or reports that had hallucinated references in them. This has happened fairly recently. One pretty famous example were a couple of attorneys who presented a case using AI, and it hallucinated case references, and the judge caught them, and didn't go well. Didn't go well for them. Um, so let's see what else we have here. Writing code, but yeah, and I know that that's definitely a fear for a lot of programmers, but you have to verify everything, right? They absolutely need to know that. Yeah, students rely on AI to generate citations in MLA or APA style. We have to think about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? I mean, I don't love writing citations, um, quite frankly. Like that's one of those lower order skills that could maybe benefit from some cognitive offloading. Yeah, please suggest students use library resources. Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. So, thinking about some of these traditional skills, can you think of ways that they then are being shifted in kind of in the space with generative AI? How is generative AI shifting these skills? So Miwako says, I'm teaching a language, spending more time on presentation in a target language than making correct sentences or translating. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great thought. Thank you, Miwako. Any other ideas about how you might see some of your traditional academic skills or tasks shifting in your discipline?
So one of the activities that I've seen other people do in my discipline is having students use AI purposefully to write an
Mm-hmm.
essay on a particular
Mm-hmm.
topic and then have the students go in and edit it and
Yep.
say, is this in real time? Right. And
Yeah.
so show up to class, bring your essay, and then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
edit it together.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. And that is definitely something we're about to talk about. And I'll tell you that I have done that as well in my writing classes. I use generative AI to create some sample essays that we would analyze together in class, and I would insert purposeful errors in those essays. Like I would use a persona, tell it to write like this, and include these kinds of mistakes, and then we'd work through it together. So it's definitely a very useful way to use it. So let's keep going. So we've thought about the good things and the bad things around generative AI, and how we might need to shift how we think about some of the skills our students are developing or they need to develop. So now let's focus in even further. Um, on how we might approach generative AI in our classrooms, and how we might design our teaching to cultivate critical thinking in its presence. So there are a couple of frameworks that I want to introduce you to. So one framework that is intended to structure this integration of Gen AI into educational practices is called the Hybrid Human AI Regulation Framework, which is kind of a mouthful, I know. And it aims to balance AI's adaptability with human oversight and explicitly encourage self-regulation. So all of these things that we've been talking about, like thinking about how our students are using it, getting them to think about it, getting them to verify things, ensuring that students are maintaining that autonomy while leveraging generative AI benefits. So it has two basic components here, right? So AI adaptability and personalization, leveraging its strengths. So things like providing personalized learning or adaptive feedback to meet some of those immediate learning needs, but emphasizing human oversight and contextual guidance. So things we've already been talking about, right? So ensuring that students are kind of maintaining ownership and autonomy over the work that they're doing while benefiting in different ways from this AI assistance. And so that's where we come in as educators, right? We are helping provide some of that necessary contextual guidance to help them address some of those challenges. So, and these frameworks are also going to be on the handout that you get. So you'll get this little list as well. So another framework that I really like here in this context is the practical inquiry model. So it's another conceptual framework that we can use, not designed specifically for AI like the other one, but I think it's a really helpful kind of critical thinking framework that we can use to apply to how we might integrate AI in our classrooms and with our students. So the PI model breaks down the critical inquiry process into these 4 phases, right? So we have a triggering event, so identifying an issue, a problem, a task, something for further inquiry. Then we have exploration, where students explore the issue individually and or corporately, right? So together in groups. Then we have integration, where learners construct meaning from the ideas developed during that exploration process. And then finally, resolution, where learners apply that newly gained knowledge to their educational context or a real world context or whatever kind of the main goal is for that learning piece. So here I've got a few examples for you for different disciplines about what this might look like, kind of applying this PI model framework over a kind of teaching and learning with generative AI. So a biology example, using Gen AI to generate explanations of biological processes, right? So present students with an AI generated explanation. So kind of like what we were just talking about, like an AI written essay or something that they have to analyze. In this case, students might compare the AI version with textbook definitions or other peer-reviewed sources that they have to gather. Students then use that comparative task to identify discrepancies, discuss why accuracy matters. And then they can revise the AI generated explanation so that it's correct. So another example, first year writing, kind of, again, what we just talked about. Share a short essay generated by AI, students analyze it, have a discussion about what makes writing authentic, how it affects voice or originality. And then here's where reflection could come in. Students write a reflective piece on maybe how they might use AI tools ethically in their own writing process, or maybe reflect on kind of the compare and contrast that they're seeing between an authentic piece of writing by an actual human being versus something generated by AI. So a couple of other examples for psychology and data analytics. I was just trying to kind of have a wide sweep of different disciplines here. So again, similar here, maybe AI generated summaries of theories that students have to evaluate, not only for accuracy, but things like bias, maybe oversimplification. Could be a great way to have a conversation about how AI might reinforce stereotypes or misrepresent theories. And then students have to kind of engage in the critical thinking and analysis process by creating their own summaries and identifying key concepts, correcting errors, etc. And then last but not least, a kind of similar idea here with data analytics. So using Gen AI to interpret some data visualizations, give them an AI generated data set. Students analyze that, assess it for validity, clarity, assumptions, have more discussion after that about how AI is helpful, but also how it is detrimental in terms of data storytelling. And then again, students compose their own, right? Their own data narrative, comparing it with the AI version, justifying their choices. So that's where metacognition could come in. So there are a lot of different opportunities here, I think, with this framework to help us think about how we can integrate AI or discuss AI use in really meaningful ways that help our students. So those are a couple of kind of big picture frameworks that I thought might be helpful. But I also want to make sure we talk about some really specific strategies that could help us cultivate critical thinking about AI use in our students. And these are, I want to emphasize, these are all evidence-based, research-based suggestions, okay? So first of all, I think we all know this at this point. We need to promote critical evaluation of the AI outputs, whether it's double checking references that have been included or looking for errors in the output that it's generated, like summaries or definitions or things like that. We want to instill kind of a healthy skepticism of generative AI in our students. And that really starts with this purposeful engagement and scrutiny of AI generated content. So we have to kind of make that a habit for them. They need to get used to doing that critical evaluation. So we want our students to learn how to treat that generative AI output really as just a starting point, not the final product, right? It's that starting point for inquiry rather than definitive answers. So we need to require our students to scrutinize the AI's response, not only for things like accuracy, but also bias, ethical concerns, logical inconsistencies, and again, those potential hallucinations that we talked about. So anything that it just totally makes up. Engage in fact checking and source triangulation with your students. So ask students to cross-check generative AI information against those more reputable traditional sources. Again, that can promote critical and responsible use of the technology. And this also can foster that kind of reflective skepticism that we were just talking about. And then in that sense, you're also helping students learn how to evaluate sources. And that's a very traditional academic skill, but we're just using AI to help facilitate that. Generate and critique flawed outputs. Ask students to intentionally to analyze intentionally poor or inaccurate AI answers. And I have to tell you, it's actually really fun to use AI to do that. I had a lot of fun generating really bad essays with it. So I highly recommend that. It's actually pretty entertaining. And that all comes in the prompting process that you use. But again, gives them something to analyze. And if they can start to find errors in other output, not only are you getting them to approach AI with the critical perspective, but then also hopefully they can take that back to their own work, right? And be able to analyze it analyze their own work. Incorporating comparative tasks. So asking them to compare and contrast AI-generated solutions or output against their own reasoning, right? So maybe have them generate their own idea or summary or argument, then have generative AI do that, and then they can do some interesting compare and contrasting with that. Because ultimately what a lot of this comes down to is that the iterative prompting process. So having to refine prompts helps them engage in critical thinking. And when they can analyze and rewrite the output that's created by Gen AI, that in and of itself is a pretty good critical thinking task. And so obviously that means we really need to teach AI prompt engineering as a critical thinking skill for our students. So they need to know that, like I think Jessica mentioned earlier, like they need to know the answers before they go into the AI so that they know what they're doing is accurate, right? And in order to generate meaningful or effective output, they have to know how to put all of that information into the prompt and to do it over and over again until it generates something useful or meaningful. And I, again, as someone who's been a writing professor, to me, that sounds very much like rhetorical analysis, right? Students have to think about the context, think about their audience, think about the goals when they're doing this prompt engineering. And again, those are all really good critical thinking tasks that also encourages them to think critically about AI. And then here's that reflection piece again. It's really, really beneficial to purposefully integrate reflective practices around AI interactions. Encourage students to engage in that metacognitive practice, right? Thinking about and articulating how did they interact with the AI? How did they refine their prompts? What choices did they make in editing or revising the AI output? All of that is really good reflection and metacognition. And that promotes a lot of really good self-awareness, self-direction. And that's a really important thing for our students. And then last but not least, obviously, we want to make sure our students know about AI's limitations and the ethical dimensions around it. And if you can ground that specifically in your discipline, all the better. Like they might have a general idea that there are limitations around AI, but what specifically in your discipline isn't limiting, right? Or what limits does it have in your discipline? And I think that's another really great way for them to learn how to be critical of the AI, especially when they're completing work for your specific courses. So we've explored some strategies to help students think critically about AI outputs, but I think the next step is even more powerful, and that is very purposefully using AI as a tool that can enhance critical thinking. So we'll shift a little bit from guarding against over-reliance to actually designing activities where AI can become a catalyst for deeper analysis, for synthesis, for creativity. So just a few ideas here. Idea exploration and perspective taking. AI can be a really powerful tool for that. It can generate multiple viewpoints about a concept or about a topic. It can help generate alternative solutions to a problem that can then facilitate compare and contrast discussions. It can help them evaluate ideas rather than settling on the first answer. Again, helping them think about multiple perspectives that might be brought to something that they might not have thought about before. It can also be great as a tool for scenario simulation, for what-if analysis. You can use it to create hypothetical scenarios. You can use it to simulate outcomes, and that can help AI users, or learners rather, anticipate consequences, weigh options, reason through complex situations, key components of critical thinking. And if you can generate a scenario that is tailored to exactly what you want it to be, rather than just digging around and trying to find one that kind of meets your needs, all the better, right? Generative AI can facilitate that. It can also be great for question generation and dialogue. We can use AI to actually prompt us with questions, to prompt our students with questions, to challenge some assumptions, suggest counter arguments, engage in a debate with the AI itself, right? Again, that stimulates inquiry. It can help refine the reasoning process. It enables kind of this interactive dialogue that is really beneficial in terms of fostering critical thinking. And then we have what somebody already brought up, this idea of pattern recognition and evidence evaluation. AI can assist in analyzing large data sets, again, with verification, we know that. It can help us identify patterns, inconsistencies. It can help us make evidence-based decisions rather than relying on intuition alone. So we can use that to help us in the decision-making process. So again, these are just a few examples based in research, but I bet you guys can come up with some pretty great examples on your own. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to try it ourselves. So Baba, are you able to upload the handout in the chat for us right now? Thank you. So being uploaded, or Baba just uploaded for you here, this is a document that has 5 different sample activities or assignments, all of which could probably be completed pretty easily by the use of generative AI. So your mission in your breakout groups, should you choose to accept it, is to analyze the sample assignments and come up with some ideas for redesigning those activities or assignments to improve students' functional AI literacy or enhance critical thinking around AI usage or output in that particular instance. And on the handout are also included the components of the practical inquiry model and the HHAIR model that we discussed. So if you want to use those as a framework to help you with the redesign, that would be great. So let's take about 10 minutes to do this in our breakout groups, and there are 5 of them. So if you want to just pick a couple that kind of speak to you or are connected to your discipline in your groups, let's do that. So Tam is going to open up some groups for us, and we will come back together in about 10 minutes. Working? Okay. There we go. So you should get an invitation to join a group.